Right, we're back with another update on the Escort. Managed to get hold of a new front windscreen, which is the bronze tinted version, and a new rubber seal, in which I've just used some black insulation tape to hold that in place, and then just dropped it on the car, just using a bit of wire in the edge of the seal, and then just pulling the wire around the inside edge until it just pops into place. It's just a case of trying to get it sat right. Not the easiest job on your own to do. It's not too bad on the front because you can actually open the doors and get in. Give the rear screen a good clean up, and then again did the same trick with the insulating tape and removed the Turbo Sport sticker as much as what I could, and then just placed that over, and then enlisted the help from my daughter to get this one in. Just as I put some pressure on the outside of the glass, just pull the wire out, or if you can use some like paracord or something like that to try and get it in, as long as it's quite small diameter, then just try and get it sat right. It's not my favourite job to do, this isn't, and it's a bit of a pain, but slow and steady and with no breakages. You can still see a bit of the Turbo Sport sticker on there, so we'll give it a bit more of a clean. It's quite a cold, damp night, so that's it for the glass, with the exception of the doors. I do need to get a passenger side bronze tint glass for that. I've got the driver's side, but I've only got the Mark IV green tint for the passenger side, so I need to get hold of one of them, but that's really simple to get installed. It's just a case of finding one now. And then next on my list of projects was to get the engine in the actual car. So what I've done is I've built a bit of a frame around the inside of my garage. My garage is actually a timber built shed, I guess, that I built probably about 18 years ago. It's ready for a bit of a refurb, so it's going to get a new roof and quite a bit of updates on it this year. I'd got some spare scrap steel, so I built a steel frame inside of the garage. You can just see it there. It just goes up and over. It's made out of 2x3 box section, so it's quite solid. It'll give me a nice place to hoist the engine up on. Now, although I'd cleaned all the engine and rebuilt it, I'm not overly happy with the state of the cylinder head. So for the sake of a few new bolts and a head gasket, I'm going to take it off again, strip it down and run it through the degreaser a few more times. Something just doesn't seem to be turning right with the camshaft. So I just want to be 100% sure that it's fully clean. With the cylinder head off, and while the engine's still on the stand, we'll get the water pump installed. So with this, I just give the side of the block a good clean, remove any dirt and dust, then a bit of silicone sealer on both sides of the paper gasket, and then it's a case of just dropping the water pump on. Torqued it up to the specs that the Haynes manual says. There's a difference between the Mark III and the Mark IV water pumps. I think it's just the angle of the water pipe that comes out. And then to get the flywheel and the clutch on, I'll just take it off of the engine stand. It's not terribly heavy engine, to be honest, so you can just lift it off, which I haven't got a bad back, and just pop it on a piece of wood so it just sits nice and flat. Then I can get the arm of the engine stand off. This should give me a little bit more room in the garage to work around. One thing that I have struggled with is the amount of room that I have in my garage, so the more room I can create, the easier things should get, hopefully. Then we'll get the flywheel attached to the engine. This is just the standard 200mm flywheel that the Mark III Escort had on it. I managed to actually get this one freshly skimmed off eBay for, I think it was 30 quid, so probably cheaper than sending it to an engineering company to have skimmed. My other one was quite badly pitted and worn. It definitely needed something doing, so not really positioned my camera in the best place for this one, so you can't really see much, but just get all the bolts in there and get them torqued up. I just use a deep socket and an extension just to help align the clutch plate and the centre of the flywheel, and just put a bit of tape around the end just to keep it so it sits nicely in the centre there. I did find that the flywheel dowel pins were slightly tight on the clutch cover, so I just went out with a drill bit that was about 1/2 mil bigger in diameter, which just helped it just slide on to still a little bit of interference, but not a lot. And then with that in place, just bolted it up and torqued it up to spec. The offside engine mount was in pretty good condition, just really oily. So just gave that a strip down. There was nothing wrong with the actual mount itself, so I just stripped it down, used some soapy water and a toothbrush and just give it a good scrub just to clean it up. And then before I forget to do this, just put the release bearing and the clutch fork back in. So that just slides over the input shaft and then the cable arm, just put a little bit of copper grease around the top there and just slide that through the plastic bushing and then down and just line up the bolt hole, and it's just a single, I think it's a 13mm bolt on that. And then to get in the actual engine block in the car. Normally when I've done this in the past, I've attached the gearbox to the engine outside of the car, pushed the engine underneath and then lifted the car over the top of it and pulled the engine up. I decided to have a go at putting the engine in with the gearbox already in place, which you know you can do as long as you take the crank pulley off. There should be just enough room to get it in there. With the engine lifted up in the air, so not a great deal of weight on these engines, not too bad. Getting the car moved as far forward as possible. Just jack up the gearbox just to lift it up slightly on that left hand side, so I can try and get the engine in at an angle and just lower it down, covering up various areas of the engine bay so I don't cause any damage to the paintwork. It all seemed to be going fine. I just really struggled to get the input shaft of the gearbox to go into the clutch. So I enlisted the help of my eldest son to just put some pressure on it while I just move the flywheel around a little bit, and then eventually it popped straight on. With that in place, it's just a case of getting the offside engine mount in place and then just the bolts through the bell housing into the engine block. And then that's nicely out the way and in the car. Also having the cylinder head off will allow me to get the engine loom ran around and brake pipes and things without it being a complete nightmare with them in the way. Would have been handy to have all that done before the engine went in, but as I say, it's just a case of trying to get some room so I can actually work around the car now. And then it was on to something that I've never actually had a go at doing anything with before apart from taking them apart. So originally I'd got two sunroof mechanisms and one glass that was out of a Mark IV Escort. Now the original Mark III Escort sunroof was completely and utterly jammed and just wouldn't turn at all. And then the Mark IV one, when I was taking it apart, I broke where the winding gear is, as you can see there. So started off trying to make the best out of the two of those. These gears are held in place by two like hollow rivets. I'm not quite sure if you can actually buy these or not, but I'm going to just nut and bolt it back together when I'm done. But just to get them out without causing any damage to the plastic, I've just used a diamond bit on the Dremel and just slowly just worked away. I think they're only like brass fitting, so they're quite soft. And then eventually they just break free and I can pop that out. The gear is just held in by a single circlip that just pops off easy enough. And then to push the gear off the actual shaft, just popped it in the vise and just gave it a bit of a knock with a hammer, which pushed it through. And then just did the exact same with the one that was rusted stiff. Just took a little bit more persuasion and just used a punch just to punch the final part all the way through. Now there was like a brass bearing that sits within these, and on the one that was completely jammed, that had broke and corroded away, so I guess that's the reason why it was completely jammed shut. Now one of the rails, the actual cable, was completely jammed in there. To try and get that out, I put some oil on it and then, as you can see, just pushed it along with a hammer just to try and free that cable out of there. Eventually, after just going quite slowly and reasonably careful, that actually does come all the way out. Then just took a bit of a pull, but it's not actually in too bad condition, that cable. Ideally it would be nice to replace these, but I don't think you can get them anymore, and I don't know any other car that has one similar, which is a shame because actually these aren't too bad to rebuild once you've had a go at doing one. The rails look quite rusty and pitted, but it's actually where they must have a double-sided tape on them, and it's just stuck to the inner roof of the car, which was rusty. As you can see, that one's quite bent and broken, so we'll not even use that one. And then the other rail, the cable was actually completely broken in there and rusted, so I just used a small little punch just to tap it along, and it did actually free up and allow me to remove damaged cable from there completely. I then just used the vise and a hammer just to try and straighten out the rails as much as possible. This one was quite badly twisted, but was also probably one of the best condition rails that I had, so it was worth just spending a bit of the time getting it as straight as possible. And I think that's probably one of the key things to refurbing these sunroof frames, is just to have everything as straight as you can and as clean as you can. These cables were bit rusted, so I just ran them through the aquablast, like a twisted piece of steel, which the gear then can hold on to pull the sliding rails up and down. But they have like some felt to them, which the aquablaster did take a little bit of that off, not enough to really worry me, and hopefully a bit of grease in there or fill that out. When I took these rails apart, most of it was all riveted together. To try and get it all back together, I've tried to use the same sort of method, but I didn't quite have the right sized rivet. So what I've done is I've just drilled the holes out slightly, and then I've used as shallow a rivet as what I had, which I think was about a 5mm rivet, and then just riveted it through the top side of the plastic frame into the metal frame, just to hold it in place. These seem to hold it quite tight, so as long as it's got enough clearance underneath from the actual sunroof tray of the car, then it shouldn't be a problem. And just before I riveted the other side together, right at the very end of these rails, you'll see a little tab that you just bend upwards, and that allows you to push the cables through from the back. And then we just get the other side riveted in place. So I managed to get a piece of board down so I can actually have something a little bit easier to work on. I've laid out the metal tubes that's used for running the wire through, and you can see it just pop out there, and then I've pushed the wire through from the bottom up. Now one of these tubes crosses over the top of the other tube, so they're not all the same, and you can see there's a bit of a kink in that one, as that one just goes over the top of that tube there. And now I've got the cables through, I'll just bolt on the winding gear, and then we can just give it a test to make sure that it actually functions as it should do. As I say, these are like riveted on, or like a hollow rivet, and I've not got the tool for that. I don't actually even know what they're called, so if anybody does know what they're called, if they can let me know, that'd be great. I then moved on to looking at the actual rails that hold the sunroof in place to the actual cables. Now, the front of these always seems to be the worst part, where the actual screw heads I had to drill off from the car, as there was just nothing left of them. So there is a thread still left in there that I need to drill out. They also have like a rubber sliding piece that was a little bit broken, so I've just super glued that back into place. That forms as like a guide for the front side of it. Now on these, there's a shaft that comes off of the cable side. I just push that back over with a bit of force. Now there was no circlip on them or anything like that, so I assume there isn't one, but if anybody knows any different, just let me know on that. Both sides had the broken stud in. One side I just managed to get a centre punch in the middle of the hole, and it drilled out absolutely fine. Then just ran a tap through just to bring the thread back. So these parts just form part of the tilting side of the sunroof. They just push into place. There's a little bit of a locating plastic dowel that just pushes through and holds it in place, and then they're also held in by the screws that bolt the frame to the actual car. There's then a small sliding metal piece that goes in there that has 3 holes in it, and that has some adjustment on it, so that's where you can adjust at which point the actual tilt operates. So you've got a little bit of adjustment on these sunroofs. With that all back together, decided to give it a bit of a test. Couldn't find the winding handle anywhere. It's in one of the many boxes of bits that I have kicking around, so I just used some small mole grips to turn the gear, and as you can see, it does pull the rails backwards and forwards. At this point, not really as smooth as what I'd like, but the general functionality is there, and that's the sort of side that I just want to test to make sure that it does function as the tilt and slide. And then just decided to give it a test fit in the car, so just put a bit of a cover in there so I don't scratch the paint. There's been a lot of work done to this sunroof tray. Most of the actual underneath of the sunroof tray is what I used of an offcut from a Mark IV, because the original one was completely rotten. So I will have a few holes that I have to drill once the frame's in place. As you can see, it sits quite well on there, so there's going to be a little bit of adjustment to be done. I'm sure I'll have to hit the roof frame in a few places just to get it straightened out, but it does sit on nicely. The frame of the skin of the actual car holds the rails where the cables run through, so testing it on the bench is a bit difficult as they will pop off, so you do sort of need it in place to keep everything where it should be. Then it's a case of just getting a few screws in there just to hold it all down and in place. The original car came with duct tape in XR2 sunroof, so this one's actually off of a Mark IV. The back side of it's in absolutely fine condition, but the front is quite badly corroded, and one of the actual tabs that bolts through to the frame is actually gone. Now, I've seen people take the glass off of these and fix the frame and put it back together. For me at this point, I'm going to clean off as much rust as I can, weld a new tab on, and just make sure that it's all working as it should. It's going to need a new rubber felt around the edge, which you can now get. They seem to have like a metal banding on them, and this one's perished quite a lot, so that's something for a later date. But for now, we'll just have a go at rescuing this frame for now. I think it's going to be one of the things where you could start cutting it and welding it and trying to make the pieces for it, but probably it's easy just to hang on until a decent frame comes available. And then with all the rusters cleaned up as much as I can, just give the actual glass a good clean. Before I weld the new tab on, I'll just clean up the metal around the area as much as what I can. There's nothing worse than welding to some dirty or rusty metal, so just try and get as much gone as I possibly can, using the grinder, the wire brush and the Dremel just to try and get in there. And then just cut a sheet of, I think it's about 1.2 mil steel to make the new tab. Then just using the TIG welder, we'll just get that in place. Then we just mask up the glass and give it a good coat of gloss black, and should make it usable for a little bit longer. Say there's 6 bolts that hold these to the actual car. It's not difficult if you find another one to swap them over. So just drop that in and try and have the rails at the side as level as you can get them, or else you end up with the awful like clunking noise when you turn the handle, which is the cables slipping on the actual gear. I then just run through the range of motions with the actual winding handle. So it's not the smoothest. As you can see, the tilt function works fine, but it isn't dropping all the way down, and that's due to the actual felt on the actual glass that's swollen up, and you can see how rusty it is in there. So what I've done is I've just cut a little bit away just to help it sit down, but I will get a new felt for this. It didn't quite seem as smooth as what I wanted it to be, so, and I just wanted to double check everything, so I just stripped the glass off again and then undid the frame. I took all the cables, the tubes, the sliders and everything like that out, took them in a bucket and filled it full of some degreaser. And this is another reason why I'm sort of wanted to clean the cylinder head again. If anything with some oil and grime on it, if you've blasted it with anything, it just gets, the bead just gets stuck to it even when you don't think it's there. I then just ran through the rebuild again, bolted the glass back in again, and then just ran through the range of motions, and it's definitely a lot more smooth in what it does. I'll get a new felt ordered for it, and I'll include replacing that on the next video. Sorry it's been so long in between updates for anybody that's following this. It's been a busy time over Christmas and decided to change jobs and things like that, so it's been a hectic time. But hopefully moving forward, get some more time to get some evenings putting videos together and working on the car, and hopefully have the car on the road this year. That's the aim. Thank you very much for watching.